how do we know someone loves you? You know, I mean, there's myriads of ways, okay, that people determine that someone loves them. But for me, this goes back to why I always talk about, first of all, of course, you know, without a shadow of a doubt, family first. You know, you know love or hate usually through family, okay? And if your experiences have been those that has been built on not just affection, because let's not confuse love with being nice to people. Sometimes you might have to chastise someone or tell someone off, and that is also love. It's not, that's why he's talking about the self-accusing spirit. It's not just, oh, everything is okay, everything's, no, that's not love. Okay, it's not just always being nice. Sometimes love is not, I'm not saying love is beating someone up or being aggressive, but what I'm saying is, you know, love is, oh, you know, you might do something as a child and you get told off, but then you do grow up and you're like, you know, yeah, I know why they're doing that, because now I have children and I'm doing the same thing. And I'm like, oh, yeah, of course. And this is why you're doing it. So again, this is why I'm big on definitions, because I don't really like assuming things, but that's why I have to explain myself all the time, so that at least you kind of are following the track that I'm talking about. But what he's saying here is that children must also be loved by anyone who takes on the responsibility of education. People who never discover their mission and fail to develop moral lives are the same people who never learn to love their own souls or spiritual core. The nature of that core is known through love. So we're talking about self-love. African self-development is also talking about African self-love. Okay? As we should discuss below, when we describe the self as a social entity, quote unquote, a part of our self-respect and dignity is acquired through the input of ideas from our environment. We have to be exposed to images that mirror ourselves, which are worthy of dignity and worthy of respect. The African child who never sees African people who are respectable and dignified has difficulty learning to respect the part of themselves that they recognize as being like Africans, blacks or Caribbeans. I added the blacks and the Caribbeans bit, but let me read that bit again. He said that, as we shall discuss below, when we describe the self as a quote-unquote social entity, a part of our self-respect and dignity is acquired through the input of ideas from our environment. We have to be exposed to images that mirror ourselves, which are worthy of dignity and worthy of respect. We have to be exposed to images that mirror ourselves, which are worthy of dignity and worthy of respect. This is why I say that if you are someone who is just going to go and use the general approach, and you're just going to go to the general media and going to be looking for quote unquote images or positive images of yourself, you will find, especially if you live in the Western world or if you live on the face of the planet today, that the social media in general is littered with negative imagery of African people. So I don't blame anyone if they see the negative imagery of someone who believes that Africans were only slaves, or Africans are only good for slavery or working for other people. If that's the only imagery that you've seen, or that's the only imagery that you know, then of course, naturally speaking, you wouldn't want to, why would anyone want to develop a slave? Okay? Or a slave self, or a negative image of a self. The negative imagery is just littered in social media. Okay? A lot of the images that we see about ourselves, and even sometimes the more you develop this self-love, as Dr. Naeem Akbar is telling us, the more you develop this self-love for yourself by looking for positive images about yourself, learning more about yourself, you know, developing a positive relationship with, you know, your loved ones, your parents, your family, your children. Once you're able to somehow get to this level, and I'm not saying I'm on that level, but just once you're able to get to that level, you will begin to reject a lot of the negative imagery that you see in the media about who you are. And we're seeing a lot more of us beginning to reject the negative images about us and the negative stereotypes that are pushed out about Black, African, and Caribbean people out there, okay? Because we understand that it doesn't serve us as a people, it doesn't serve us as individuals, it certainly doesn't serve us building that spiritual soul or core aspect of ourselves, which is important, okay? Rather than just looking outside and just saying, well, I'm Black and that's it, okay? So let's carry on. We have to be exposed to images that mirror ourselves, which are worthy of dignity and worthy of respect. The African child who never sees African people who are respectable and dignified has difficulty learning to respect the part of themselves that they recognize as being like Africans. If the only human images that are presented to them in their education are images of dignified people who are not Africans, then they have difficulty finding mirrors of themselves in their education. If the only human images that are presented to them in their education are images of dignified people who are not Africans, and we get loads of that, then they have difficulty finding mirrors of themselves in their education. And I'm saying this not to say that you should go and subject your children, but as if you're an adult watching this, you have been subjected to just a whole host of negative images, and you probably didn't see a lot of positive images in your education, and therefore the ideas or the self-definition or how you define yourself today is probably going to be based on those negative experiences or those negative associations or those negative assignations that we have in our environment. Okay, the identification with let's go back. If the only human images that are presented to them in their education are images of dignified people who are not Africans, then they have difficulty finding mirrors of themselves in their education. The identification with alien models is a fundamental part of the miseducation process. So even though they may have been loved in the home and even in some of their classrooms, there will be a defect in their self-love if they do not find confirmation for that love and respect in the social environment. The power of love in the home and even in isolated parts of the social environment is often effective enough to cultivate self-love even when much of the environment fails to affirm oneself. This is why so many effective and impressive African Americans came out of the quote-unquote Old South and Northern ghettos, where the predominant influence gave a negative image of African Americans. A little bit of love goes a long way. An essential part of education is to see oneself as a social or tribal being. And this is what I've been trying to emphasize in my videos, that the African self is unlike any other self on the face of the planet. The African self is also not limited to the individual or the ego per se, as defined in the Eurocentric or European model or definition of the self. The African self is a multidimensional self, is a multidimensional definition of the self, and you have to be clear on these multidimensional aspects of the self, and then you have to then, once you're clear in terms of you define it, then you have to then go on and develop it. Okay, and it's not as taxing as you may think it is, because this is who you are, this is who we are. Okay, an essential part of the education is to see oneself as a social or tribal being, shown in respectable and dignified contexts. Again, there is no shortage of this quality when we analyze the educational system of Euro-American people. When you see Euro-American people, it's always, like in movies where, the world's about to end and disaster, all of a sudden, the white dude comes in and he just saves the whole world. You know what I'm saying? Tom Cruise. It is what it is. Anyways, these qualities that I am suggesting being necessary for the proper education of African American children or African children in general. When I say African American, it could be African British, it could be African Nicaraguan, it could be African Jamaican, it could be African. Okay, insert wherever you are on the face of the planet. Okay, if you are African person who is interested in self-development. I'm not even talking to all Africans, I'm talking to Africans, Caribbeans and Black people who are interested in self-development. Okay, that's who I'm talking to. These qualities that I am suggesting being necessary for the proper education of African American children are neither radical nor unknown. They are actually quite common elements in the educational system that Americans or Europeans have set up for themselves. There are strong messages of self-love and self-respect that run throughout those systems. It is simply that the qualities of self-love in that system do not serve the educational needs of African people, African Americans, African Brits, African wherever you are. Now, what is considered radical is the recognition that Africans, African Americans, African Brits, Blacks, and Caribbeans need an educational system that is reaffirming of them as the Euro or European or Eurocentric, Euro-American, Euro-Brit system reaffirms its peoples. So there are strong messages of self-love and self-respect that run throughout those systems. It is simply that the qualities of self-love, quote unquote, in that system do not serve the educational needs of Africans or African Americans or African Europeans, if there's such a thing. What is considered quote unquote radical is the recognition that Africans, African Americans, African Brits need an educational system that is reaffirming of them as the European American system reaffirms its peoples. So when our master teacher, Dr. Asa G. Hilliard, is saying that we have to develop an independent vision of self, he was intentional when he said that, because he understands that sometimes the vision of the self that is given to us as African, Blacks, or Caribbean people on the face of this planet today didn't come from a place of self-love. It didn't come from a place of self. It came from an alien self that has told us, that is affirming its love towards the self. Okay, so this is what I mean. Again, when I say that you have to take time and take care when you are developing your African self, or when you're developing yourself and you happen to be if I can say that, you happen to be Black, African, or Caribbean on the face of the planet, you have to take time and you have to take care. You have to take time because you need to do the homework that's required, and the homework that's required has been done, okay, for us. So some of the homework has been done for us, and we have to actually go and look at these books such as Know Yourself by Dr. Naim Akbar, and The Miseducation of the Negro, The Falsification of African Consciousness, books that I have shown so far in my videos. Okay, so I hope this is beginning to make some sense. He's then going to go on to talk about the personal self, and then he's going to go on to talk about the other aspects of the self in this book. And these are all aspects of our learning, which I hope to share with you in upcoming videos. Okay, I do hope that this is helping to build, as I said, this is helping to build a better picture of what the African self is. Okay, please like, please share, please comment, and definitely please subscribe to my channel. Please help my channel grow. There is so much more of this stuff to come. You know, even if you haven't got the books, at least you can hear me reading the books, and you can then, if you know, when you do get a chance, you can go and purchase these books, and you can then have these books in your house. Okay, especially this stuff that I do, I hope will help just Africans in general, Blacks in general, Caribbean people in general. I hope that this stuff, or one of the reasons why I'm doing a lot of the stuff I'm doing, is because I just haven't read up on history, haven't seen the fight for liberation amongst African people on the face of the planet, seeing how Africans have, the things that Africans and Blacks and Caribbean people have gone through in the last 2,000 years. Let's not even say the last 500-600 years, but the last 2,000 years again. Plus, let's just say it's not very pleasant. Again, we've had ourselves utterly, the African self, or the concept of the African self, completely shattered, utterly destroyed. Okay? So if you're aware of this, then you understand that we have to piece it all back together. And when you see, or when I meet African people who portray, or at least give off, that they are aware, or they have a true knowledge of self, and then, for example, you ask them questions on history, or you ask them questions on certain things, and I'm not saying that everyone knows everything, I'm not saying that I know everything, but you want to know where someone is with regards to, if they claim that they know the self, and then you ask them certain questions and they don't, you just, if you know what's happened in history, then you would know what you need to do moving forward, okay? So you wouldn't necessarily make these wide claims or these claims that, for example, you know, that you know who you are. And then also, as I was saying, if you know what's happened in the last, say, 2,000 years, but let's say in the last decade per se, okay? And you see that we've had African people who have become conscious, or who are on the path of consciousness, who know who they are. What's happened is that they have, for whatever reason, the momentum seems to have dissipated. And I know that maybe every sort of generation, every 10 years, every decade, there's like a rise because something happens, and then Black people or African Caribbean people are, you know, more and more affirming who they are, but then for whatever reason it just dies down. Okay, so I do these videos, or I'm doing these videos because I think it's important to keep our eyes on the ball and remain focused on what we have to do as African people. And I think that a lot of, or in the past, a lot of our attempts at affirming who we are as African people has been done using, or has been done by just building aspects of our shattered self, focusing on that aspect and saying, oh, this is who I am, and I finally discovered who I am. So as I say, many of us would probably say, oh, you know, I am a professional and I work within this particular industry. And you say, who are you, or what do you do? Oh, I am X. And they say, I do this for a living. And that's all they identify as. You know, I'm a scientist, for example, and everything I do is about science, and I think scientifically, and even other people project this on you. So you make a point and people say, oh yeah, you probably because you're a scientist, or you're a lawyer, or you are a journalist, or you are a because you travel a lot, you're an air hostess or whatever, or you, whatever it is that you do. Okay, people, either you think that way because that's the self that you've built, or that's what other people expect from you. And I feel that that hasn't really got us very far. We seem to be just sort of starting over and over and over and over again. So I do these videos, as I said, I hope that they do make a transformational difference in your life, but I also do want to give a definition of what African self is, and also to understand that it's not, African self is unlike any other self. So in developing it, we have to be very sure, or we have to understand exactly what it is that we're doing. Okay, we may not be able to have another chance at developing an African self because, anyways, we may not. So if you are part of the group of people who currently are in understanding that the self needs developing, understanding that the African self is different to the other selves, understanding the history of things that happen, understood or understand the present political and economic conditions, as well as the understanding of the hegemony and education in its direct and indirect forms, understanding that we have to go back to our excellence or excellent educational traditions in order to be able to build ourselves. If you are one of those people, then I really do hope that these videos are helping. Please share them with your friends. Please leave your comments. And let's just see where this goes, okay? So thank you for taking time out of your precious day to watch this video. My name is Atu-kway. I am, and I do hope to be your African-centered tutor in the very near future. As I always say, my area of interest is education, but specifically speaking, African-centered education, and my topic of interest is knowledge of self, okay?